Alright, what's up, guys? Real quick, I'm gonna make this quick. I don't want to waste your time, okay? I know you're here. You want to hear a story from yours truly. And a story you're gonna get. You're gonna get a damn good story. One that I wrote. And it might just be the best short story ever written so far. Until I write the next greatest short story ever written. Okay. This is called The Targeted Individual. That is the name of this story. I wrote this a year ago when I was unemployed and drinking all the time. So it has this very, schizophrenic vibe to it, I guess. And I think it's pretty good. It's a nice little story. I think you guys will enjoy it. There are people out there in the real world that think that the government is after them, and there are various agencies trying to kill them and spy on them. So my idea for a story was, what if they were true? What if there really was someone out there who was the targeted individual, in which world governments and federal bureaus are obsessed with this guy, trying to stop him, trying to spy on him, trying to break into his house. That was the idea for this story. I think I'll place the camera right here, and I'll read it from my phone. So the energy I'm trying to create here is basically you're laying down in my car, and I'm sort of on top of you, like this, and I'm looking down at you, and I'm telling you, and it's kind of like I'm telling you a good night story, a story that you can fall asleep to. So if any of you guys want to just lay down and get a glass of warm milk, and I'll tell you a bedtime story. Okay. By the way, I'm not editing this at all. I'm just gonna stitch clips together. I'm the author. I can do whatever I want, so I can sort of talk off the cuff, and I can give my opinions, and I can, it's not going to be, this is not professional, audible, audiobook tier stuff. This is rough. It's going to be rough. You're going to have to deal with it. I'm sitting outside my gym. My shift starts in 2 hours. Okay, let's get this done. The Targeted Individual by me. Prologue, Chapter 0, October 19th, 2092. Gary Soul went about his day as usual. He woke up around noon, played Steam games for a couple hours, and ate a microwaved breakfast at 3 in the afternoon. From an objective point of view, Gary was a pretty normal guy, 30 years old, 180 pounds, 5 foot 11 inches, short brown hair, brown eyes, never wore anything but white t-shirts, jeans, and sneakers. Probably the most painfully average protagonist you could create. Gary liked to keep things organized. He spent 99% of his life cooped up in his apartment, so he might as well keep it clean, orderly. There was no clutter, no grime, no dust. Everything was spick and span, like the perfect home you would see on Zillow. Within his apartment complex, there was over 50 available spaces to rent, but 49 of them were completely empty. He was the sole resident. And within his neighborhood, his building was the only building with any signs of life. The streets lay empty, no pedestrians, no cars driving down the road. All the buildings were dark, cold, empty. An entire section of Washington, D.C. had been abandoned and dubbed Sector G, a 3-square-mile containment zone made specifically for him. And at some point in the day, Gary realized he was all out of eggs, so he put on his shoes, walked down the crumbling neighborhood, past collapsed buildings and moss-covered homes. A military checkpoint had been set up around the perimeter of Sector G to prevent Gary from escaping. But it was nothing more than a security theater. The truth was, Gary had absolute power, and nothing, not even barbed wire and machine guns, could stop him. Once a week, Gary would walk into the city to buy groceries, or go sightseeing, and there was nothing the federal government could do about it. A 19-year-old Marine assigned to Checkpoint Bravo was looking through a pair of binoculars when Mr. Soul suddenly came into view. When the young soldier saw Gary, he nearly shat himself. He immediately grabbed the radio and spoke frantically. "This is Private Wilson at Checkpoint Bravo. The public enemy is in view. I repeat, the public enemy is in view. He's coming right for me." Gary was dance-walking down the street, listening to the new Drake Jr. album on his AirPods. The bass line was so funky that he couldn't hear the sound of military sirens and alarm bells going off. Private Wilson fell out of his post and limped over to Gary, his clammy hands barely holding onto a trembling rifle. "Stop right there, Gary. Under international law, I cannot let you cross this border." "What, didn't you hear me? I said stop! Stop! Gary, you gotta stop, goddammit!" Gary caught the soldier in the corner of his eye. He took out his AirPods and smiled. "Oh, hey, Wilson, I didn't see you there. I'm just going into town for some eggs." He put his AirPods back in and crossed the border, effortlessly. And the private was dishonorably discharged a few hours later. All of his benefits were denied. His wife left him shortly thereafter. He was denied permission to see his son. Tough break. Gary walked down the streets of Washington, D.C., hands in his pocket, whistling a tune. Crowds of people would stop and stare. Infants would cry when they saw him. On every business, there was a black and white photo of Gary's face and text that read, "Gary will not be served here." And when Gary walked into the convenience store, all the customers dropped to the ground and surrendered. The cashier opened the register and begged for his life. Gary ignored all this and picked up some synthetic eggs. "Hey, how you doing? Just a dozen eggs. What do I owe you?" he said earnestly. The cashier didn't answer, so Gary sighed. "Fine, how does $10 sound?" He left the $10 bill on the counter and left. Now, if you were from an alternate universe, this scenario may seem absurd, but this was an everyday occurrence, the norm. No one could remember how it started, or what he did to garner this level of public contempt. But somehow, Gary's soul became the most feared man on planet Earth. The FBI, CIA, Pentagon, FSA, Mossad, United Nations, hey, you name it, all of them had it out for him. World governments declared him a threat, and they punished him with hit pieces and tariffs. The people refused to even look him in the eye. His presence alone sent many into cardiac arrest. His status was atemporal, as if he had always existed, and always will, and he was the incarnation of infamy, the eternal enemy of humanity. That was a damn good prologue, Mr. Riley. You're really good at writing the intro to your stories, setting the vibe immediately. I might have to use the bathroom soon. I might have to go to Barnes & Noble's and pass the time. Chapter 1, October 21st, 2092. It was a bright, sunny day at the National Mall. The sky was blue. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. Gary was taking a relaxing afternoon stroll, really soaking in the crisp autumn breeze, as crowds of people screamed in terror at him, throwing bags of chips and water bottles at his direction. He stopped to look at the World War III memorial, observing the names of the fallen with sincerity and reverence. Over 30 million Americans died over the course of 2 years. The power grid had been shut down for months after a series of cyber attacks. What followed was a global food shortage and severe economic depression. There was no electricity, no heating, no air conditioning, no internet, no live streaming, no more binge watching, no more pornography. Hundreds of thousands of teenagers died to nicotine withdrawals from the lack of vaping every 5 seconds. What a tragedy. The loss was too much. When Gary thought about all these things, he shed a tear. Now, he wasn't weak, okay? He just wasn't afraid to show his emotions. Real men cry in public. Maybe you can learn a thing or two from him. 30 million dead bodies. Can you believe it? We're gonna be there shortly, though. Don't worry. As Gary read the names of fallen Americans, written in hot pink Comic Sans and slapped on a concrete wall, a single person walked up behind him. This was strange, as most people stayed at least 50 feet away from him at any time. This was the first time in years that someone willingly walked up to him. Gary turned around and saw a tall blonde woman standing there. "Yo, what's up?" Gary said, slightly confused. The woman walked up to the wall and silently read the names of the victims. She spoke to him. "Kinda disrespectful, wouldn't you agree?" "What is?" "The font, it's distasteful. They should have hand-carved names. They should have hand-carved their names, like all the other memorials." "Well," Gary said, they, had 30 million people to honor. If they hand-carved all of them, it'd be pretty expensive. It's a matter of quantity, I think. This is absolute filler. This is garbage. I should have cut this out. Anyways, yeah, I guess. Gary scratched his head. So, why are you talking to me? I mean, hey, I don't mind. It's just, it doesn't happen very often. The woman smiled and walked closer to him. I don't know. You seem like an approachable guy. Really, he said, surprised and flattered. Yeah, you seem like a nice guy to talk to. Well, thank you. What's her name? She said her name. Veronica. Hey, Veronica, I like that name. The name's Gary, although you probably already knew that. She laughed silently. Yes, I've heard all about you. Must be hard living like that. All the media slander and condemnation. How do you do it? Oh, well, I kind of just ignore it all. Gotta have a positive attitude, I guess. I only have one life. Why would I spend it feeling sorry for myself? That's something you guys need to learn. Okay, something maybe I need to learn. Veronica seemed overly enthused as Gary spoke. She nodded along to his every word and stood way too close. Wow, that's very interesting. Inspiring stuff. Personally, I don't believe anything the fake news media says about you. It's all lies. Gary smiled. Yeah, they love to exaggerate things about me, but I don't blame them. It's a business. They gotta make money. Veronica stepped even closer. I just can't believe the United Nations declared you a threat to global peace. I mean, they're saying you're trying to obtain WMDs. That isn't true, is it? Gary uttered. No, I don't even know what a WMD is. What is that? Like weapons of mass destruction. Weaponized viruses, chemical weapons, nukes, dirty bombs, that kind of thing. Gary didn't know how to respond. Veronica smirked. If you ever interested in developing such weapons, then maybe we can talk about it. Honestly, I think the world would be a much better place with you in charge. I mean, it wouldn't be the worst thing if New York City was turned into a smoldering crater, right? Gary stood there, frozen in place. He stared into her eyes. Something wasn't right. Gary was severely autistic, but even he was able to pick up on her body language. For a moment, he glanced past her, and he saw something in the distance. He saw a black van with an antenna on the hood. Gary looked back at the woman. She was sweating profusely, trembling slightly. He took a step back. Are you spying on me? Veronica went pale. She touched her earpiece and sprinted away. Fuck, I lost my place. Oh yeah. Walked away as fast as possible and screamed, "Abort mission!" A black van full of FBI agents pulled up, and the sliding doors flew open. She jumped in and it sped off immediately. Gary stood at the memorial, dumbfounded. Certainly an interesting scenario, but nothing too crazy. He shrugged his shoulders and walked off. Gary strolled across Independence Avenue with hands in his pockets. Anytime another person saw him, they would freeze up before running across the street. No one wanted to be on the same sidewalk as him. No one except the obvious federal gang stalkers that followed him everywhere he went. This was very normal to him, but every once in a while these occurrences would remind him of a different time in his life, a time when he wasn't so calm and collected. Alright, flashback. Flashback chapter. Get ready. Chapter 2, January 4th, 2083. Back then, Sector G didn't exist yet. A young Gary Soul had no choice but to live on the streets, for no landlord would dare even talk to him. Gary would frequently go on night walks, chain-smoking cigarettes that he found in public ashtrays, and he would be drinking anything he could get his hands on. Gary paced up and down the streets of Washington, D.C., hiding his face from everyone, ashamed of who he was. For a while, he was squatting in an abandoned warehouse, spending entire nights staring out the window, looking to see if any federal gang stalkers were outside. They were. Gary was hiding in the upper levels of the warehouse, puffing on a half-smoked cigarette he found in a sidewalk crack. It was about 3 a.m. He had been up for 48 hours. He was dead tired, but how could he sleep? A few months earlier, he caught a couple CIA agents taking photos of him. His disguises were no longer working. Gary took a sip of his beer as he stared out the window. Suddenly he froze up. A glint of light caught his eye, a reflection in the bushes. Someone was spying on him with a pair of binoculars. He dropped to the floor and started hyperventilating. This was his 4th home this month. He had hoped he can stay here for a little while longer, but he would have to move once again. He couldn't keep living like this. He started crying. The agent outside the warehouse touched his radio. Yeah, I've lost sight of the public enemy. Looks like he's gone to sleep. Should be clear to wiretap this place in the next hour. The front entrance to the warehouse swung open, startling the agent. Gary Soule stood in the doorway drinking straight vodka. "Where the fuck are you?" Gary yelled in a drunken voice. "I know you're out there." The agent held his breath and tried to slink away, but the sound of rustling branches caught Gary's attention. "There you are! I can hear you!" The agent stood up and screamed into his radio, and Gary threw the bottle in his direction and sprinted towards him. "Don't you run from me!" Gary tackled him to the ground and shook him violently, with tears streaming down his eyes. "What's the matter with you? Why can't you leave me the fuck alone?" Gary let go of him. He sat down on the sidewalk, defeated, and the agent ran out of there, lucky to be alive. Gary slept on the sidewalk that night. Crowds of people circled him, watching him sleep. Okay. I'm gonna start a new clip. Chapter 3, November 2nd, 2092. Mr. Soule sat on his living room couch watching TV and surfing the web at the same time. He liked to watch funny videos on TikTok. His favorite videos were the Family Guy clips with Subway Surfers in the bottom of the screen. Little did he know, a room full of NSA agents hundreds of miles away were spying on him through his computer. They could see everything he looked up. They could see him looking at pictures of goth girls on Instagram. They could see him watching 12-hour-long video essays about Shrek 3. They could see him window shopping on Amazon for Criterions. Disgusting. 2 agents sat at their desk, monitoring everything. Agent Riley, what the fuck? Agent Riley reviewed his search history as Agent Davis looked at the keystrokes. Okay, he's logging on to Reddit. What's he looking at? Looks like it's a meme page or something. What kind of memes? Anything related to WMDs or terrorism? No, I don't think so. They continued logging his activity. Oh shit! What? I'm checking out his past search histories. You're not gonna believe this. Take a look. Riley turned the screen towards Davis. On the screen, they could see all of Gary's previous searches from last week. The White House. This is what he was searching. The White House. JFK. Who killed JFK? JFK conspiracy. How many presidents have been assassinated? When's the next election? Recipe for key lime pie. Key lime pie, low calorie. What drink pairs well with key lime pie? WMD. What is a WMD? WMD list. Their jaws dropped to the floor. They couldn't believe it. Pull up his live feed, Riley yelled. Davis jumped into his desk and pulled up Gary's screen as fast as possible. What's he doing? He's looking at videos of the president. What? What's he planning? In a separate tab, there was a search for hot, muscular goth girls. Stay on them, Riley said. I want everything logged. Every keystroke, every click, every search. Suddenly, Gary closed all of his tabs. The 2 NSA agents sat there, staring at a black screen. What? What the fuck just happened? Riley asked. And Davis sunk into his chair. He sunk into his chair. He just went incognito mode. It's over. There's nothing we can do. Riley took off his glasses. His hand was trembling. He had to sit down. He rubbed his face and messed up his hair. Suddenly, he slapped his fist on the desk. He can't keep getting away with this! He can't keep getting away with this! A few hours later, Gary was taking it easy. His socks were off. His feet were kicked up, and he was enjoying a crisp, delicious Diet Coke as the international news played on his TV. Here's what the news had to say. In other news, the public enemy, Gary Soule, is continuing his reign of terror against the United States. Earlier this week, he violated international law again when he crossed the border into the nation's capital. According to several credible sources, Mr. Soule was harassing pedestrians, spraying graffiti on national monuments, threatening to detonate dirty bombs in major metropolitan centers. The United Nations had once again declared him to be a threat to world peace and democracy. Several nations raised concerns about Gary's escalation. The frequency and severity of his attacks has increased exponentially in the past 3 years alone. Just yesterday, NATO declared that they would begin enacting greater tariffs on Gary. Their proposals include the following: cutting off his access to the internet, having his Steam account banned, putting an extra layer of razor wire around Sector G. President Harlan announced this afternoon that he would begin an educational awareness campaign against Gary. He said, "My hope is that we can spread awareness about the dangers of Gary to the nation's youth. Our children need to know what to do in the event of a Gary terrorist attack." Where was I? We now show you a clip from the speech he gave just an hour ago. President Harlan walked onto the stage. He gave a salute and took his place at the podium. "Good evening, my fellow Americans. I want to take this time to talk to the American people. Talk to the American people about a wicked man who has been a plague on the nation for years. Gary Soule, I'm talking directly to you right now. We will not be afraid." Thousands of people stood up, screaming and applauding. The president looked fearless and fired up. Earlier this week, according to credible anonymous sources, Mr. Soule threatened to kidnap and torture American citizens, just for fun. He threatened to detonate nuclear bombs in major metropolitan areas. He even threatened to assassinate me. Gary Soule, we will never bow down to you. You can kill me, you can kill every last person in America, but America will always be a sovereign nation. We will never bow down to a tyrant like you. The president finished his speech with a salute, followed by thunderous applause and a standing ovation. The news anchor began talking. President Harlan's approval is currently at 95%, with his re-election predicted to be a landslide victory. No doubt due to his fearlessness towards Gary's threats. That's right, Gary. We know you're watching this broadcast right now. Okay, we're not afraid of you. This nation's strong. America is strong. Humanity is strong. If you want to do the right thing, maybe you should do us all a favor. Snuff it. Now a word from our sponsors. Gary changed the channel to 24/7 live stream of Factorial gameplay. As Gary watched the screen, his mind wandered. He thought about the president. He thought about all the slander, all the lies. He thought about where he was and what he could do. Maybe he should take another trip into Washington, D.C. tomorrow. I need to piss. Alright, we got a nice little lens flare going in to my camera. Looks good. Nice lens flare. Here's the sun. Okay. Where was I? Get some air going. Got a nice little too loud. Got my cookie. Okay. Damn, that's bright. Chapter 4, November 3rd, 2092. Hold on. Should I eat while I read this? President Harlan sat in his Oval Office. Most of his cabinet was there, along with half a dozen Secret Service agents, lobbyists, United Nations officials, the Vice President, several generals. All right, everyone, the President spoke. As you know, the re-election is in a few days, okay? Now, the polls are looking pretty good, but I don't want to take any chances, all right? I want Gary monitored 24/7. I want Gary spied on constantly. Do whatever it takes. I don't want any more incidents until after the election. Speaking of which, what's the status on Mr. Soule? The Secretary of Homeland Security, loosened his collar, swallowed nervously. Well, we don't really know. The president looked shocked. The fuck you mean you don't know? Is he in Sector G or not? He glanced over to the generals and put his hands in the air, utterly shocked and upset. One of the generals spoke up, afraid. Well, sir, we scanned his home with a radar, and well, it's empty, and we don't really know where he is at the moment. The president covered his face with his hands and exhaled loudly. He put his head on the desk, sorry. Can you people do anything right? There was a knock at the door. A Secret Service agent. Can I read anything? There was a knock at the door. A Secret Service agent was let in. He ran towards the president. The look on the agent's face was of pure terror and panic. What is it? The president asked. The agent bent down to whisper in his ear. Mr. President, we need to get you to the bunker. Right now. What's going on? A corporate lobbyist demanded to know. The agent looked at everyone in the room. There's a threat outside the White House. Someone's trying to break in. The president's eyes widened. You don't mean? That's right, Mr. President. The day we always feared. He's crossing the South Lawn as we speak. We need to get you to the bunker. And the president was rushed down to the bunker. Gary Soule strolled across the South Lawn with hands in his jacket pocket. It was such a beautiful day. The flowers were in full bloom. A small army of Secret Service agents ran across the lawn with rifles in their hands. One of them had a megaphone. Gary, stop right there. This is an act of war. Turn around, or else there will be severe consequences. Gary walked up to them with a smile on his face. Excuse me, gentlemen, do you know where I can find the president? You'll never find him, one of the agents yelled. He's probably deep underground by now, safe in his bunker. Okay, great, thanks. I'll go there. I'll head there. And Gary walked into the White House with the Secret Service, Army troops, and feds swarming him. As he wandered through the halls, a small crowd of people begged him to leave, and he ignored them. He walked down long hallways and then down a deep staircase, eventually reached a thick metal door, and he knocked on it. Yo, Mr. President, are you in there? I just want to talk. Shit. Behind the metal door was the presidential bunker. The entire executive branch was down there, along with their children, and anyone else who pushed their way in. The vice president, who was a known satanic pedophile amongst DC socialites, was so afraid that he actually prayed to the Christian God. This looks beautiful. Look at the cinematography. Gary was eventually able to guess the code. It was 0000, and he waltzed in there, causing the entire room to be filled with screaming and crying. One Secret Service agent raised his rifle and pointed it at Gary. Stop or I'll shoot! The president spoke up. Lower your weapon, damn it! It's no use! The bullets will just bounce back. And the room had calmed down. The scared and afraid people were dead silent as the president and Gary talked. So we meet at last, Mr. Soule, the president said. You've really done it this time. What do you want, the nuclear codes? Access to America's armed forces? Not happening. You'll never get me to talk. It doesn't matter if you torture me. You can pour hot lead down my urethra. You can stab my balls with fire pokers. Waterboard me. Put bamboo sticks under my fingernails. It doesn't matter. I'm sorry. What? Oh, wait. I read ahead. Damn, I messed that up. Gary paused for a moment before laughing. What are you talking about, dude? What? I just wanted to ask you something. No, I just wanted to ask you something. Is there any way you could stop lying about me? I'm sorry, what? The president said. Well, it's just that, you keep saying I threatened to do a bunch of crazy shit, even though I never said any of that. It's making me look bad. And hey, man, look, I get it. You gotta look good for re-election, but come on. It's uncool. Just knock it off, okay? The room was totally silent, and then everyone in the room started throwing binders and folders and balls of paper at him. He looked very, very sad and disappointed by the whole situation. Gary slumped his shoulders and sighed. Well, anyways, I gotta head out. I'll see you guys later. He walked out of there and straight home. Okay, I'm back. All right. I just drove a long time, but we're so back. We're so fucking back. Okay. Chapter 5. November 4th, 2092. Gary was chilling out on the recliner couch with his feet kicked up, a Diet Coke in his right hand, and the remote in his left. Maximum coziness. Not a care in the world for this guy. Suddenly, the TV changed from a news segment about state-mandated genetic modification to a breaking news story from the United Nations. On the screen, there was an emergency meeting being held at the United Nations HQ. President Harlan was hunched over the podium, absolutely red in the face and seething with rage. Trying his best not to explode, his fingers were wrapped around the podium with a death grip. His anger was palpable. I want to thank everyone for being here on such short notice. Now, I don't want to beat around the bush. We have a problem that needs to be solved. And hey, I know this is supposed to be a very formal event, and I'm the leader of the free world, so I should probably try and keep my composure, but frankly, I have fucking had it with this kid. The entire world gasped, and what followed was several minutes of whispering and gossip amongst all the nations. The president wiped the sweat off his forehead. So, anyone got any ideas? And there was no response, which made the president even angrier. Are you fucking kidding me? No one has anything to say? What's the point of this organization anyways, if you're just gonna sit around and force me to solve all your problems? Is that all this is? America has to save the day. America, please, we're too stupid to run our country. We need you to do it for us. You know what? Fuck all of you, good-for-nothing losers. The entire world hung its head in shame until one nation showed up. It was a representative from the small African nation of Infirma. We're not going to take this disrespect anymore, Harlan. The president started twitching and glancing everywhere. Who said that? Your administration is completely incompetent. Gary Soule has total control over you. You can't even defend your own borders. You can't even control your capital. You can't even stop him from breaking into the White House. Hey, as far as I'm concerned, the United States isn't even a sovereign nation anymore. And a random voice crawled out. Maybe Gary should be standing at the podium. And everyone seemed to agree. The president was appalled. Another voice yelled, We've been waging war against Gary for years, and what has it gotten us? We're done taking orders from you. The entire world cheered and screamed with joy. President Harlan stood there shaking with fear as representatives and ambassadors screamed death to America. And so many shoes were thrown at him by Middle Eastern journalists that the Secret Service had to scoop him out of there. Gary couldn't believe this. What has he done? He thought long and hard about the ramifications of his behavior and his responsibility as a sovereign citizen. Anyways, Gary cracked open a cold Pabst Blue Ribbon, and switched the TV to YouTube Shorts on autoplay. After a few minutes of mind-numbing MK Ultra content, Gary's mind was completely fried. The mixture of alcohol, repetitive songs, and text-to-speech voices and unfunny sketches made him clinically retarded. He was in a state of hypnosis, watching worthless and meaningless videos for hours, completely wasting his time. But a knock at the door snapped him out of it. Strange, he doesn't usually get visitors. When he opened it, he saw 3 African men standing in the hallway. 2 of them appeared to be soldiers, but the one in the middle was of high status. He wore an expensive suit and round glasses. The African man held in his hands a stack of papers. Good evening, Mr. Soule. May we come in? I'm tempted to try and do an African accent, but I don't think I'm going to risk it. Just imagine I'm speaking in an African, like, if you ever seen, what's that Tom Hanks movie about the Somalian pirates? You are not the captain of this boat. I am the captain now. Okay, imagine I'm doing that voice. I'm not going to do it for this guy. Well, maybe I will. I don't know. Gary stood in the doorway with a raised eyebrow. Yeah, sure. Come on in. Once they entered his apartment, everyone sat down at the kitchen table. They laid out stacks of papers and urged Gary to sit down and listen to their offer. The man spoke calmly. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Barack Okafor. I'm the ambassador from the People's Republic of Infirma. We want to make you an offer. An offer? Gary said with confusion. Yes, Mr. Soule, an offer. Gary looked at him intensely. He straightened his posture. What is this, some kind of setup? You got Fed written all over you. Let me guess, FBI, CIA, Mossad, FSA, TSA? Mr. Okafor... What the fuck is this? Who's texting me? Fuck off. He sighed and took off his glasses. Mr. Soul, I can assure you we are not feds. This is not a mission of espionage. This is not a setup. The whole world knows about you, Gary. We've seen what you're capable of. And truth be told, they're afraid of you. I'm afraid of you. Mr. Soul, the nation of Infirma bows to you, and only you. Your power is beyond understanding, beyond comprehension. We know that you could destroy our entire nation with a glance. So we're here for repentance, he said fearfully. He was starting to get choked up. I'm here to ask for your mercy. The whole nation of Infirma, it's yours. We have armies lined up, ready for your orders, sir. Secret agents in every major city on Earth, armed with dirty bombs. They're all at your disposal. Just give the order. Gary looked at him the same way you would look at a homeless person or a schizophrenic patient, with confusion and fear, but trying his hardest not to offend. Accidentally pissed them off. Look, Gary said, you're too kind. I mean, hey, it's a generous offer, but I have a pretty sweet gig here in Sector G. Okafor got on his hands and knees, and the two soldiers did the same. They worshipped him, kissing his feet. This made Gary flinch and take a step back. Please, Mr. Soul, come to Infirma with us. We want you to lead us. Don't you already have a king or something? I'm pretty sure he's a better leader than I am, Gary said. The three men were on the verge of tears. We have no king but Gary. Gary looked at them with disgust. He sighed. Fine, I'll be your king. And they laughed with relief. They were overjoyed. And my first act as king is this. I resign. Now get the fuck out of my apartment. I have like 30 minutes to read this before my shift starts. I think I'm gonna go for it. Here we go. Get ready, get ready, get ready. Alright, here we go. November 5th, 2092. Gary was walking down the streets of D.C., drinking a coffee. The chilly rain ran down his face. But he didn't mind the cold. He needed to occupy himself, distract himself. Maybe a walk would cool him down. He had been worked up lately, not his usual happy self. The video games he played, the shows he watched, the candy he ate, they just didn't feel the same anymore. He would watch something on TV, then realize a few minutes later how meaningless it is. Not just that, but everything. All of this. It's all a big nothing. He strolled down the road, hands in his pockets, AirPods on. 10 or 20 agents following in the distance. Sometimes he would stop, turn around, and start sprinting, acting like he was going to attack them. They would always run away like scared children, before coming back a few minutes later. Gary did this just to fuck with them. Feds are scum, worse than animals. They should be scrubbed off the street and flushed down the drain with the rest of the garbage. This is what Gary subconsciously thought. This is what the author also thinks. Up ahead, there was a young woman walking by herself, a small blonde, very vulnerable. She was small, blonde, and vulnerable, alone on the street with a large purse. She hadn't noticed Gary yet. Out of mercy, Gary crossed the street. He didn't want her to know about him. He would spare her the knowledge of his existence and the fear that follows. As he was crossing, a hooded man lurked up out of an alleyway. He crept up to the girl, and just as he turned around, he wrapped his arms around her. She screamed and tried to resist. Gary ran up to him. Yo, what the fuck you doing, man? The man pulled out a knife and grabbed the young girl. He put the knife to her chest. Fuck off, man. I'll stab her. Don't fucking test me. I've killed before, and I'll gladly do it again. Gary looked at him with searing hatred. The man paused and analyzed the face in front of him, and then he realized it was him, Gary Soul, the enemy of humanity. Get away from me! The man let go of her and ran off with her purse. Gary tried to console the young woman. Are you all right? He asked. But she had nothing to say with him. She was on wet concrete, covering her face. She was begging Gary not to hurt her. Gary looked at her with a pained expression. Rain running down his face. He looked over and saw the man running away. I'm gonna get your purse back, ma'am. Gary chased the man down. The criminal was running for his life. Where was I? Fuck! Down wet streets and dark alleys, he occasionally looked over his shoulder, only to realize that Gary was closing the distance. They passed a police station. The criminal turned to see if Gary was still following, but he slipped into a deep puddle, falling to the ground and cracking his head open on the sidewalk. Gary slowed down. He was laughing and breathing deep from the cardio. He bent down to pick up the purse. Serves you right. Then the sound of a gun clicking. Gary turned around and saw the cop pointing a revolver at his head. Drop the purse, Gary. Mr. Soul looked at him with wide, psychotic eyes. Where was I? He looked offended, disgusted even. I'm sorry, what did you say? Gary, please, don't make this harder than it already is. Gary chucked his coffee at the officer, causing it to splash all over his uniform. Who the fuck do you think you are? You think you can tell me what to do? What are you gonna do, arrest me? You gonna shoot me? Don't you know who I am? I'm the targeted individual. The cop was shaking, partially from the cold rain, but mainly from nerves. Gary walked right up to him. The cop started backing up. Gary tried to grab the gun, but the cop resisted. After a brief squabble, somehow the trigger was pulled, and a stray bullet flew into the police station. Gary stood there, in pain from the deafening gunshot. The cop went running, probably to hide into a dumpster. The entire police station was put on lockdown. Federal agents in the distance did nothing but take photos and jot down notes. When Gary found the young woman, still laying on the ground, she wouldn't even look at him. She was paralyzed with fear. She didn't want the purse back. She wanted Gary to leave her alone. She was more afraid of Gary than the man who almost killed her. Fuck this, Gary thought. Fuck this world. So he's having a little bit of a Russ Cole moment, okay? Fuck this world, man. Okay, a few hours later, Chapter 7. After drying off, Gary was trying to take it easy. He poured some wine, put a movie on, and cooked himself some dinner. The movie was American Psycho, and even though he was in a bad mood, the business card scene still made him chuckle. Gary was alone on a Saturday night, just him and his thoughts. But that was okay. Maybe some people are better off alone. Gary finished chopping the onions, so he moved on to grating the cheese. But just as he reached for the grater, he suddenly collapsed to the ground. A high-pitched, screeching sound played from inside his skull. He writhed on the kitchen floor in severe pain. He could hear static and buzzing, and finally a voice. A voice spoke to him from inside his skull. Gary? Gary, can you hear me? His head felt like it was going to explode. He could feel his entire body buzzing with radiation. He tried to stand, but he didn't have the strength. He barely had the strength to breathe. Don't bother responding, said the voice. This is a one-way transmission. Yeah, Gary's going to transition. This is a one-way transmission. You can hear us, but we can't hear you. Gary threw up on the floor and curled up into a ball. The sinister voice mocked him. Mr. Soul, it didn't have to be this way. That's right. Don't you recognize my voice? It's me. Gary wiped the vomit off his mouth. President Harlan? That's right, Gary. It's me, President Harlan, President of the United States of America. What you're experiencing right now is called a sonic attack, an intense burst of microwave radiation, straight into your skull. You think you can fuck with me, the president screamed. You come into my house, threaten my life, embarrass me? Let's see how you like it. You can't run away from this, Gary. I'm going to be in your head 24/7. The president then transmitted an 8-hour broadcast directly into Gary's mind. The pre-recorded broadcast was an attempt to brainwash him. They played hypnotic music, and a woman's voice repeatedly told him to kill himself. The electronic voice went on for hours. The woman in his head listed various methods of suicide he should try, like hanging himself, drinking drain cleaner, jumping out of a window, etc. Gary sat on the floor, rocking back and forth, waiting for it to end. At some point in the night, the transmission ended. Gary fell asleep on the floor of his kitchen, covered in vomit and tears. I'm lightheaded. But I'm going to go on. Chapter 8, November 6th, 2092. Gary awoke to the sound of glass breaking. A giant rock flew into his apartment. Gary could hear the muffled sound of yelling outside his apartment. He jumped up and looked out the window. Hundreds of protesters were outside his house, holding signs, nooses, and burning torches. They pelted his apartment with bricks, rocks, and beer bottles, and they screamed creative obscenities at him. He could also see DC police officers FBI, CIA, Marines, Army troops, even the Space Force was there. Every intelligence agency, law enforcement, and branch of the military was outside his house. Even Interpol was there, alongside United Nations peacekeepers. When Gary turned on the TV, he could see a live broadcast of his home. He could see himself standing in the living room. And then they showed interviews of various protesters. On the TV, a reporter was talking to a microphone. This is Lex Baldwin with Channel 6. We're currently outside Gary Soul's headquarters. Now we're staying about 20 feet back because we have no idea what kind of booby traps he set up. The protester witnessing started about an hour ago after the military officially lifted its embargo on Sector G. Shortly thereafter, a grassroots protest was organized on Facebook against Mr. Soul. The TV then showed an interview with a left-wing protester. A 20-something Marxist with dreadlocks spoke into the microphone. "Hey, fuck Gary, man. He's a classic example of white supremacy and fascism. Someone needs to teach him a lesson, if you know what I mean." And then the TV showed an interview with a right-wing activist, an older guy with a red hat and an American flag t-shirt. Gary Soul, so imagine the Chud meme. This is the Chud. Gary Soul is just another globalist elite trying to destroy the sovereignty of the traditional American nation and the American people. And frankly, fuck. I messed it up. And frankly, I think he might be Jewish. Let me say that again. Let me redo that. Pretend I didn't say that. Gary Soul is just another globalist elite trying to destroy the sovereignty of the American people. So he's looking over his shoulder, making sure there's no one in his vicinity. And he's like, and frankly, I think he might be Jewish. Where was I? Another radio transmission played inside Gary's skull. Look outside, Gary. You're surrounded. My re-election is in 1 day. And if you think I'm going to let you ruin this for me, you got another thing coming. If you know it's good for you, you'll surrender to the military. The crowd of people jeered and screamed at Gary's house, hurling threats his way, when suddenly a door opened, and Gary came walking out. The crowd froze, and hundreds of angry people instantly shut their mouths. Gary stood in front of them, wrapped in a purple bathrobe, his eyes bloodshot, hair disheveled. "What is your problem?" he asked. "The fuck do you want from me?" There was no response. Gary looked at the crowd with sadness in his eyes. "What did I ever do for you to hate me?" The crowd murmured. "You threatened our way of life." "How?" Gary asked. "You promised to nuke our cities." "That was a lie," he yelled. "All they do is lie." "No," the crowd responded. "You are the liar, and lying is your native language." The crowd was getting antsy. They pushed closer to Gary. All the cops, troops, and feds aimed their rifles. A nearby tank prepared to blast him away. Finally, a single Molotov cocktail was thrown. It soared over his head and into his bedroom window. Gary froze. Everyone froze. Gary looked at the growing flames with horror. The flame grew quickly. His bedroom was engulfed. All his Funko Pops were destroyed, alongside his CD collection, his Criterion box sets, his VR headset, the $3,000 gaming PC he built, his PlayStation 8, his fleshlights, the many white t-shirts he owned. His entire life was in there, and now it was just ashes. And his apartment was burned to the ground. He started crying. He broke down in tears. All his toys and games were destroyed. He had nothing left to live for. He screamed at the crowd, "Who threw that? Who just burned my house down?" The crowd parted like the Red Sea. The skinny communist was quickly singled out and thrown under the bus by his comrades. That poor kid. He nearly shat himself when he saw Gary Soul power walking towards him. The crowd of people did nothing. There was nothing they could do. Gary had absolute power over him, beating him within an inch of his life. He was crying. Blood was spurting out of his nose and mouth, begging Gary to stop. Gary raised his fist in the air. Shit. But he stopped short. He stopped himself short. Seeing the kid's mangled, fucked up face made him pause and really think about his actions. He saw the world from a third-person point of view, looking down at himself and the hundreds of people around him. Far-left and far-right extremists united alongside cops and military, intelligence agencies, entire nations, all of humanity. They all feared and hated him, but they were powerless to resist him. In an instant, the angry mob which had planned to kill him was now willing to kill for him. Gary stood over an army of people, all of whom were bowing down. One of the 5-star generals crawled up to Gary. "Forgive me, sir. I was just following orders from the president." Gary glared down at him, hesitating to talk at first, but finally he said, "Well, you have new orders." "Of course, sir. Anything you need. We're at your service. What are your orders?" "Take me to the president." Oh, damn, I'm beat. And I have a shift in 15 minutes. Alright, let's get this finished. It's a few hours later. It's immediately following. A convoy of tanks and armored vehicles rolled down the highway. Their destination? The White House. Gary looked out the bulletproof window and saw chaos in the streets. People looting, neighbors killing each other, religious people preaching that the end was nigh. Cops were shooting other cops. Soldiers of different branches fought battles against one another. A full-on civil war, the end of the world. Gary spoke to the driver. "What's going on outside? Why are they doing this?" The driver responded, "It's all for you, Gary. This is what you wanted, right? Tell them to stop." The driver laughed. "Sir, if there was a way to communicate with everyone, I doubt they would want to stop." "Yeah, and why's that?" Gary asked. "Because this is what man does best, to fight and die for a man greater than himself. If not for you, then it would be someone else they would kill for." On the White House lawn, the Secret Service was gunning down Gary's army. We are almost done. Let's finish this. Where the fuck was I? The agents were good, as were the snipers on the roof, but they just wouldn't stop coming. Wave after wave of grunts stormed the White House lawn, only to get blown up by landmines, ground up by machine gun fire, or having their heads exploded with .50 caliber bullets. However, a few would eventually make it inside, and after a while the Secret Service was overrun, and the White House was filled with Gary's minions. Gary was ushered into the Oval Office by armed guards and army troops, and they would gun down any Secret Service agent they found. Gary would cry and tell them to stop the killing, but his demands were ignored. President Harlan sat at his desk with a gun in his hand. He was on the phone with his wife and kids, wishing them goodbye. He hung up and put the gun to his temple. He sat at the desk. What is this? The door was kicked down, and a legion of soldiers and Gary stormed in. The Oval Office was empty. Only the president was there, sitting at his desk. "Hello, Gary," Harlan said. "Where is everyone?" Gary asked. The president laughed. "They're deep underground." "Yeah, and why aren't you with them?" "Because of this." And he ripped open his shirt to reveal a heart monitor strapped to his chest. "You didn't think I would just roll over and die, did you? No, sir! I'm not the president who surrenders. I'm the president who chooses death before dishonor. If my heart stops, then all the nuclear bombs in the world will be launched, and all of Earth will be the target. And not just America's nukes, but every nuclear power within the United Nations. It'll be Judgment Day for humanity. The final page will be turned, the book will be closed, the end of reality." Gary looked at him with extreme shock and confusion. His jaw was on the floor, right next to his sneakers. "What? That's insane, Mr. President. Why? You want to rule the world? Fine, you can rule over the ashes. If you kill me, I'll nuke every inch of this planet. And if you don't surrender right now, I'll kill myself." Gary looked down at his feet. "The choice is yours, Gary. It's always been your choice to make, hasn't it?" "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Gary asked. "Maybe you're making this shit up. That heart monitor isn't even real. There are no nukes. You're bluffing." The president laughed. "Well, I guess that's a risk you'll have to take. I guess you'll have to make a decision and find out." Gary sat down in front of the president. He rubbed his face and sighed. "I didn't want any of this, Harlan. All I asked was for you to stop lying about me." The president grit his teeth. "You should have known your place. We gave you Sector G. We even let you use the internet. We ran electricity to your apartment. We pumped hot water to you. What, you thought they just came up out of the ground? No, Gary, we kept you alive in your own little bubble. You know why? Because we needed you. Gary quickly glanced up at him. You need me? The president lowered his gun and spoke honestly. You know why God allows evil to exist? So that good can triumph over it. But I'm not evil, Gary asked. Gary said. The president paused and looked down. No, Gary, you're not. But the people have to think that you are, so that they can prevail against you. United under a single cause. Gary slumped into his seat. I just wanted to be liked. Not even that. I didn't want to be hated anymore. The president frowned. I'm sorry, Mr. Soul, but no matter what happens here today, that outcome will never happen. It's simply not possible. Gary dropped his head. You can either lay down a defeated enemy, or you can reign over humanity, a feared and hated ruler. The choice is yours. Gary stayed seated for a moment. He looked around the room. He saw the potential energy. 10 billion people could die instantly if he said the wrong thing. All this power at his fingertips, but no desire to do anything. Gary smiled. Well, Mr. President, it's been an honor talking to you. I want to wish you the best of luck in your second term. Gary held out his hands and demanded to be arrested. Everyone in the room let out a sigh of relief. Gary was taken away, never to be seen again. August 10th, 2102. Gary Soul sat in a straw hut, meditating and eating crab legs. For almost 10 years now, he lived on the small Pacific island of Epilogue, isolated from all civilization, alone, with hundreds of miles of ocean in every direction. He was finally at peace. His clothing was made of leaves and string. His diet consisted of fish, crustaceans, and seagulls. After all these years, he finally had the physique and complexion of his dreams, six-pack abs and golden tan skin. He sat on the beach drinking coconut milk and viewing a golden sunset, unaware and uncaring about the rest of humanity. The official narrative from President Harlan was this. Gary, the incarnation of evil, was killed in battle. The president was hailed as the savior of the world and unanimously elected as the supreme leader for life of the new Earth government. 100 years of pure ecstasy and dopamine followed. A golden age for the human race. The end. Yeah. Okay. That was fun reading. I have to go to work now. Like an absolute wage cuck. I have to go stock shelves now. Until next time.